Close your eyes and let the ancient world unfold. A world without cities, without kingdoms, without borders marked on maps. Only endless horizons of grasslands, forests, and rivers, where small groups of early humans wandered under the same moon. We see tonight. The air was colder, the nights longer, the silence broken only by the rustle of wind and the call of distant animals. Yet in that silence lay the fragile heartbeat of survival. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in scattered bands, gathering, hunting, moving with the seasons, their lives tied to the rhythms of nature. But even in this quiet existence, shadows stirred, tensions brewed, and questions lingered. Why did these groups sometimes meet in peace and at other times clash in violence? Why, in the midst of survival, did humans begin to fight each other? The answer is not simple, and I won't reveal it all just yet. But traces are buried in the soil, carved into bones, and echoed in the stories of every culture that followed. Scientists have found skulls cracked by deliberate blows, skeletons pierced by stone-tipped spears, remnants of massacres older than any civilization, proof that the roots of human conflict run deeper than kingdoms and kings. Yet the truth is stranger and softer than it first appears, for war did not rise all at once like a thunderstorm. It crept slowly, born from hunger, fear, competition, and something even more elusive, the fragile pride of being human. And as you drift deeper into this story, you will hear how the first sparks of violence flickered, how fear became strategy, how strategy became ritual, and how ritual hardened into the wars that would one day engulf the ancient world. But stay with me, because not every truth will be spoken at once. Some will unfold gently, layer by layer, like the firelight of a camp long extinguished but never forgotten. This is not just the tale of battles fought. It is the tale of how humans, fragile and dreaming, discovered the most dangerous invention of all. In the half-lit dawn of human history, when our species was still scattered across the vast landscapes of Africa and beyond, the earliest whispers of conflict began not with armies or strategies, but with something far more primal: survival. Imagine small bands of hunter-gatherers moving silently through tall grasses, their eyes scanning for game, their stomachs hollow with hunger, their lives balanced on the edge of scarcity. And now imagine another band approaching from the opposite direction, their needs no different, their desperation no less. Two groups, two fires burning in the night, both seeking the same water source, the same patch of sheltering trees, the same herd of animals. This was the stage where the first sparks of human violence were struck. Not yet war as we know it, but collisions born of necessity, clashes that left marks not only on bone, but on memory. Archaeologists uncover evidence from sites such as Jebel Sahaba in the Nile Valley, where skeletons more than 13,000 years old bear wounds from projectiles, suggesting that entire groups fell victim to sudden assaults, ambushes in the dead of night. Yet this story stretches even further back, 500,000 years, where broken skulls and fractured bones tell us that violence was not an invention of civilization, but an inheritance from the deep past. And here lies the mystery. Were these killings accidents of rage, or were they the seeds of organized conflict? I will not reveal that just yet, but keep listening. For the truth lies in the slow evolution of human behavior, in the way fear of losing food transformed into the strategy of taking it. in the way suspicion of strangers hardened into hostility, and in the way cooperation within one's group made outsiders into rivals. What makes this story haunting is not only that humans fought, but that they learned, passing down lessons of defense and attack, watching, remembering, teaching, the very same intelligence that built tools and art also sharpened conflict. As centuries stretched into millennia, these encounters etched invisible scars into our collective mind, preparing us for wars that did not yet exist. And so, while the firelight glowed gently in the night, and the stars wheeled overhead in their silent brilliance, the first stories of human violence were being written, not in words, but in blood, in fear, in survival. But stay with me, because these were only the earliest shadows, and the true birth of war was still to come, waiting in the hidden spaces where survival began to turn into strategy. In the half-lit dawn of our species, when the earth was colder, when the forests stretched endlessly, and the plains were alive with shadows of mammoths and wild cattle, human life was fragile, balanced delicately on the edge of hunger and hope. And it was in this fragile balance that the first sparks of conflict began to glow. Picture not soldiers in armor or kings on thrones, but small bands of people, fewer than 100 souls, wandering across a hostile world, bound together by blood, by trust, by the simple need to share fire, food, and safety, yet always wary of others who might cross their path. Every day was a negotiation with nature, but sometimes the greatest danger came not from the claws of lions or the fangs of wolves, but from other humans whose eyes held the same hunger, whose hands gripped the same sharpened stones. When two groups crossed paths, the outcome could be as simple as cautious distance or as deadly as sudden violence. For every river, every grove, every herd of animals was precious, and there were never enough to go around. Evidence buried in the earth tells us this story quietly. Cracked skulls more than 500,000 years old bearing marks of deliberate blows, skeletons pierced by sharp points of flint, ancient bones unearthed at Jebel Sahaba in the Nile Valley, showing dozens of wounds from arrows, a frozen moment of massacre from nearly 13,000 years ago. These were not the battles of armies, but the clashes of survival, swift, brutal, and unforgettable. Yet something deeper was taking shape here, something that cannot be explained only by hunger or accident. Humans, unlike any other species, carried memory like fire. They remembered faces. They remembered betrayal. They remembered the sting of defeat and the thrill of victory. Each encounter left behind not just wounds, but lessons. And slowly, across generations, the art of survival began to fold in the art of hostility. But what is haunting is that even in these early stages, violence was not constant. It ebbed and flowed like the seasons. Some groups shared food, exchanged mates, even formed alliances, but always there lingered the question of trust, and trust is fragile in a world of scarcity. A gesture misread, a resource withheld, a boundary crossed, and peace could dissolve in an instant. Was this war? Not yet. Not in the way we would come to know it, but the shadows of war stretched across those ancient plains, taking shape in the minds of our ancestors. The true beginning of war was not a single battle, but a slow awakening. The realization that taking from others could be easier than finding anew, that violence could secure survival, that intimidation could protect, resources without a fight. And so while the firelight of a camp flickered softly against cave walls, while children fell asleep to the hum of distant night sounds, somewhere in the minds of their elders stirred the knowledge that danger was not only in the teeth of predators, but in the presence of strangers. This knowledge was passed quietly, in warnings whispered to the young, in scars carried proudly or secretly, in stories of bloodshed retold as caution or legend. It was here, long before the first cities or empires, that humanity began to step down the path of organized conflict. The land itself seemed to conspire in this transformation. Harsh winters forced groups closer to scarce food. Droughts drove wanderers toward contested rivers. Fertile valleys attracted many feet at once, and every meeting carried the chance of either fragile peace or sudden death. And through all of this, the human brain, restless and creative, was learning. The same mind that carved tools from flint was carving strategies of defense. The same hands that painted animals on cave walls were also shaping weapons, not just for the hunt, but for the possibility of human blood. But stay with me, for the story is not yet fully revealed. And what comes next will show how this fragile dance of survival began to harden into something more deliberate, something ritualized, something we would one day call war. As the centuries slipped into millennia, the scattered clashes of survival began to transform into something more deliberate, more patterned, almost as if violence itself was learning through human hands. And this transformation whispers to us, from silent bones and buried weapons scattered across ancient earth. Hunter-gatherer groups, once fluid and mobile, often found themselves circling the same landscapes season after season, drawn by rivers, herds, or sheltering valleys. And with repetition came tension, for returning to a place meant crossing paths with others who believed the same land belonged to them. And here, in these contested spaces, the fragile balance tipped toward organized hostility. No longer just chance encounters at the edge of a forest, but premeditated confrontations, ambushes planned near waterholes, raids launched to seize stored food or captives, defenses built with sharpened stakes or stones carefully arranged to funnel intruders. Archaeological traces whisper this story quietly. Pits filled with the remains of men, women, and children who perished together. Flint arrowheads embedded in bones. Clusters of skeletons suggesting entire families fell in. Sudden waves of violence, and though no voices remain to tell us why, we can sense the logic. Resources guarded fiercely, territory claimed invisibly, revenge carried across generations. Even in this shadowy age before writing, humans carried ideas as weapons, and the idea of us against them may have been one of the most dangerous ever born. Within the safety of one's group, trust ran deep. But beyond the firelight, the stranger became a threat, and the act of uniting against an outsider may have strengthened bonds within, transforming conflict into a strange and brutal tool for social cohesion. It was no longer only about food or water, it was about identity, belonging, loyalty, and fear. Slowly, the outlines of organized war took shape. Scouts moving ahead to track rival groups. Alliances formed not for trade, but for protection against neighbors. And weapons evolving not only for hunting, but sharpened for battle. The hand axe and spear, once symbols of survival, now became instruments of dominance. and the discovery of the bow and arrow added a haunting distance, allowing humans to strike from the shadows, to kill unseen. Imagine the effect of this, the tension of silence before the attack, the sudden flight of arrows from the dark, the terror etched into memory. These were not armies yet, not the legions of Rome or the phalanxes of Greece, but they were their ancestors in spirit, the first stirrings of humans fighting not only for survival, but for power, for control, for the fear of being controlled. And here lies the paradox. The same intelligence that built shelters, tamed fire, and shaped tools also gave rise to strategy, ambush, and organized defense. What is most haunting is that in many cases, peace may have been an option, but suspicion was stronger, and suspicion often killed faster than hunger. Stay with me, because within these ancient wars lies the blueprint of every war to come, the seeds of territory, revenge, fear, and pride. And though the world of 500,000 years ago feels impossibly distant, the echoes of these first organized conflicts still beat quietly beneath the rhythm of our modern lives. When humans first began to scatter seeds into soil and tether animals to their settlements, everything changed. For no longer were they only wanderers drifting with the seasons. They were now tied to the earth, to fields of grain, to herds of goats and cattle, to clay jars filled with harvests that represented life through the winter. And with this permanence came a new danger. Their wealth could not move, and to protect it, they themselves had to stay, defend, and if necessary, kill. This was the moment when conflict deepened into war with roots as heavy as stone. And it was no longer only about food in the belly, but about pride, about identity, about rituals and the gods they believed guarded their land. Farming villages sprouted near rivers, their fields gleaming under the sun, their granaries swelling with food, and suddenly abundance itself became a reason for violence, for raiders could seize in one night what would take months to grow. But instead of dissolving into endless chaos, humans began shaping violence into a kind of order, cloaking it in ritual, justifying it with stories, sanctifying it with belief. The earliest shrines carved into stone whisper of gods of war, thunder, and vengeance, invoked before men marched with spears. Bones uncovered near ancient temples suggest sacrifices were offered to ensure victory or appease the spirits of the dead. Here, violence became something more than survival. It became destiny, even duty, for entire communities. The first farmers were also the first to build walls, mud brick barriers that ringed their villages, symbols not only of defense, but of division, the visible line between us and them. Behind those walls, people trained not just to hunt, but to fight. Young men learning to wield clubs, spears, and later bronze blades, their strength not tested against wild beasts, but against the men of neighboring villages. And yet, war was never constant, for trade still bound groups together. Alliances formed through marriages, and peaceful days stretched long between bloodshed. But the potential for violence was always there, simmering beneath the surface, like coals hidden in ash. Ritual turned battles into more than raids. War drums beat to stir courage, chants echoed through the night. Painted bodies marked warriors as chosen by gods, and death itself was woven into a sacred story of honor and remembrance. Evidence of this lies in mass graves where warriors were, buried with their weapons, or in carvings, showing victorious kings standing over rows of defeated enemies. It was as if war had been transformed from a desperate act of survival into a theatre of power, a way to write one's name in the memory of a people. Yet even here, in the flicker of torches around village fires, there was unease. For once war is ritualized, it rarely fades away. It becomes a cycle, one battle remembered by another, revenge for the dead fueling the blood of the living. Farming created abundance, but abundance created envy, and envy created organized violence. Cycles that spun across centuries until war was no longer rare but expected, anticipated, sometimes even celebrated. Still, the story is not so simple, for some of the earliest evidence of diplomacy also emerges here. Gifts exchanged, treaties carved into clay, promises sealed with ritual meals, and so war and peace grew together like twisted roots from the same soil. The unsettling truth is that once humans had something worth protecting, they also had something worth taking. And in this fragile new balance of wealth and fear, the shape of true war was born, the same war whose shadow still lingers across the world today. But stay close, because what comes after this is darker still. The age when leaders realized war could do more than defend. It could conquer, expand, and build empires from blood and ash. As small farming villages expanded into larger communities, something new began to emerge. Leaders, chiefs, and rulers who realized that war was not just a curse of survival, but a tool of control, a way to gather loyalty, wealth, and power that no harvest alone could provide. And with their rise, the very nature of conflict shifted forever. No longer was violence a chaotic clash between equals at the edges of fields. Now it became organized under banners, directed by commands, measured not only in lives lost, but in territory gained. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient fortresses with thick walls, towers, and gates dating back thousands of years, places that did not simply defend fields, but proclaimed dominance, standing as symbols of a community's strength and the authority of those who led it. Chiefs and early kings began to weave war into their identity, claiming divine favor, presenting themselves as chosen by gods to protect their people and smite their enemies. And this belief gave war a terrifying legitimacy. Battle became not just survival or revenge, but a sacred duty to follow one's ruler even into death. And as settlements grew into proto-cities, the rewards of war expanded. Captured slaves to labor in fields, stolen goods to fill treasuries, conquered land to feed growing populations. Leaders learned that war could unite their people under fear and pride, keeping rivals within their own walls subdued by pointing their anger outward. And slowly a cycle took root in which power itself became inseparable from conflict. The evidence lies in the earliest written tablets where kings boasted of campaigns, in the carvings showing lines of prisoners marched before victorious rulers, in the ruins of cities burned and rebuilt again and again across Mesopotamia, the Levant, and beyond. Close your eyes now. Let your breath soften, and let the weight of the world drift away. For tonight, we are not in the present, but stepping backward into the shadows of deep time, to an age when the earth itself trembled with endings and new beginnings, when fire rained from the skies and the world as it was came crashing down. 66 million years ago, a moment arrived that shattered the age of giants, when an asteroid larger than mountains roared through the heavens and struck the Yucatan with such force that the oceans boiled, the forests burned, and the sunlight itself vanished behind curtains of dust and ash. And in those silent hours that followed, life was left gasping in the dark. This is not a story of dinosaurs, though they had ruled for over 160 million years with thunderous steps and endless majesty, but of what came after, of how the earth, broken, scorched, silent, learned to breathe again. For from that graveyard of giants rose the fragile beginnings of our own story. Though the details are hidden in fossils, in whispers of ancient rocks, in the faintest traces of teeth, bones, and pollen pressed into stone. What happened in those first days after impact? Who survived when the world seemed impossible to endure? These are questions we will follow slowly as we journey through the most devastating extinction in Earth's history and trace the fragile green shoots that grew in the ashes, the mammals that crept out from the shadows, the birds that spread into skies once empty of wings, and the long path that would, in time, give rise to apes and eventually to us. Stay with me, because the secrets of how Earth recovered after the dinosaurs are not simple, and not all will be revealed at once. There are truths I will hold back, details waiting in the dark, and twists buried beneath the surface of stone that will only emerge when the time is right. For now, know only this. The end of the dinosaurs was not the end of life, but the spark of a new chapter. And it is here, in the quiet after catastrophe, that our story truly begins. The day after the asteroid struck, the Earth was no longer the same planet it had been for over 100 million years. For in the space of hours, the lush green world of dinosaurs had been reduced to a wasteland cloaked in fire, ash, and endless night. And in that silence, the great beasts who had thundered across plains and jungles were gone, their colossal bodies lying lifeless among the smouldering forests, while only the faint cries of smaller creatures echoed in the dark, clinging to whatever scraps of life they could find. The oceans fared little better, for waves higher than mountains had scoured the coastlines, sweeping entire ecosystems into oblivion, while rains of molten rock fell like stars from the sky, setting the very surface of the seas to boil in places. And yet, even here in this inferno, there were survivors. Tiny fish darting deep into the blackened waters, small amphibians burrowing into the damp mud, and insects hiding beneath bark and soil, waiting for the fires to subside. But the true horror was not in the fire, it was in the cold. For when the ash clouds spread across the globe, sunlight vanished, plunging the earth into months, perhaps years, of darkness, a nuclear winter long before the concept ever existed, where the plants withered, the food chains collapsed, and starvation became the greatest predator of all. The dinosaurs, massive and magnificent, could not withstand this endless famine, but the small, the adaptable, the overlooked, mammals no larger than a rat, scuttling and scavenging in the underbrush, endured, for they could eat what the giants could not. They could hide where the predators could not follow, and they could reproduce quickly, ensuring that even if many perished, some would endure. It was here, in the silence of this devastation, that the seeds of a new age were planted, though no one living then could have known it, for the world smelled only of smoke and decay. The rivers ran with ash, and the land was littered with bones. But beneath that desolation lay opportunity. Yet do not think recovery was swift, for the earth does not heal in a day, nor even in centuries. What followed was an age of shadows, a slow, painful resurrection, where every species fought for existence, and not all would win. The reptiles that had once ruled still lingered in reduced forms. Crocodiles in the swamps, turtles in the rivers, and lizards clinging to warm stones. Their kind never fully vanquished, but no longer dominant. Instead, the stage was left open, waiting for something else to rise. You may think this story is simple. Dinosaurs vanish, mammals take over. But the truth is more twisted, for many early mammals perished too, and entire lineages disappeared. Before they could leave their mark, their names now lost to stone. Survival was not guaranteed. It was a lottery of adaptation, luck, and chance. And those who made it through the dark years carried scars that would shape the future of life. This was the crucible in which evolution sharpened its blade, testing every creature in fire, famine, and frost, and those who endured emerged leaner, hungrier, and more cunning, ready to claim a world that was finally free of towering giants. Yet even then, even in this fragile dawn of mammals, the earth was restless, its skies clearing only slowly, its forests hesitant to regrow, and its ecosystems fragile enough that a single bad season could bring collapse again. But from this struggle, a pattern was set. In the ashes of destruction, life always finds a way. And the way it found here would, in time, lead to apes, and through them to us. But that is a revelation I will hold for later, for the story of how Earth rose. From fire and shadow has more to unveil before we reach the first primates, who would one day gaze at the stars and wonder how it all began. When the fires finally dimmed and the ash began to settle, the Earth revealed a scarred and barren surface, landscapes stripped of their once vibrant life, where the silence of lost forests echoed like a haunting memory. Yet even in this devastation, nature's resilience stirred, for deep beneath the soil lay seeds waiting for their chance, spores and roots holding on to life in fragile patience. And when the first weak rays of sunlight pierced the heavy sky, they began to sprout again, timid shoots pushing through the blackened ground, each one a quiet rebellion against extinction. It was not an overnight transformation, but a slow reclaiming as mosses spread across charred stone, ferns uncurled in damp shadows, and hardy plants grew in soils enriched by the very ash that had once suffocated them, building the foundation for forests that would rise anew. And in the absence of the colossal dinosaurs that had once stripped vegetation bare, plants flourished differently, taller trees finding space to spread their branches, new flowers evolving to attract the buzzing insects that had managed to endure. The long winter, beginning partnerships that would redefine ecosystems for millions of years to come. Yet, if the land seemed fragile, the skies were even more uncertain, for once they had belonged to the thunder of pterosaurs and the cries of dinosaurian predators, but now they were claimed by survivors that many would not have noticed in the Age of Giants. Birds, the last descendants of the dinosaurs, carrying within their bones the memory of wings that had once stretched across continents. Freed from competition, birds diversified quickly, their beaks adapting to seeds, insects, and fish, their feathers carrying them into niches once impossible, until the air that had been emptied of reptilian rulers became alive with song and flight. But the rise of birds was not just a matter of wings, it was a declaration that evolution rewards the adaptable, those who can seize what is left when the powerful are gone. And this truth applied to every corner of the recovering earth, from insects reclaiming the undergrowth to mammals creeping into abandoned ecological roles. Yet even as life returned, the planet still trembled on the edge of collapse, for the balance was delicate, the climate volatile, and every success carried the shadow of potential failure. But slowly, over tens of thousands of years, a new rhythm emerged. Forests dark with dense canopies, rivers flowing with fish, skies bright with feathered forms, and plains that would one day carry the footsteps of species not yet imagined. It is tempting to say the earth healed, but healing implies restoration, a return to what was before, and the truth is more mysterious. The earth did not return to the age of dinosaurs. It created something entirely new, an ecosystem built on survival, adaptation, and opportunity. And though it may sound like the mammals were already poised to rise, their triumph was still uncertain, for they were small, vulnerable, and hunted by predators that had managed to endure. Birds of prey, reptiles, and even other mammals competing fiercely in a world still reeling from devastation. This was not yet their age, not fully, but it was their chance, a foothold into the future. And from that foothold would come species that reshaped the planet forever. But that revelation lies ahead, for at this moment in deep time, the world was still balancing on the fragile threshold between death and recovery, between a planet lost to silence and a planet humming again with life. And the story of how the mammals began to tip, that balance is one I will share in the coming breath, for their rise was no accident, but the product of everything that had come before, from fire to ash, to the first trembling leaf stretching toward the sun. In the shadow of the vanished giants, the mammals crept forward, no longer confined to the cracks of the world, no longer scurrying beneath the stomping feet of dinosaurs. For with their great oppressors gone, the night became their canva. Yet even in this age of possibility, the mammals were not the unquestioned rulers. They were survivors, opportunists, their strength not in size or dominance but in adaptability. And adaptability is a quiet power, one that waits, one that grows in silence until the world is ready. And though the path from these humble beginnings to apes and eventually to humans is a long and winding one, filled with twists and unexpected turns, the roots of it all were laid here, in this fragile recovery, where small, vulnerable creatures proved that survival belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. Still, the most dramatic transformations were yet to come, for as mammals explored every niche, evolution was preparing lineages that would one day take to the seas, as whales soar through the skies as bats, thunder across plains as elephants, and indeed, walk upright as us. But before that future could unfold, the Earth had to continue reshaping itself. Climates had to shift, continents had to drift, and extinctions had to come again, clearing the path anew. For the story of life is never a straight line, but a cycle of destruction and rebirth. And even now, in this era of fragile triumph, shadows of new challenges were already gathering on the horizon. The Earth is never still, and as the survivors of the great extinction spread and adapted, the planet itself was busy rearranging its own stage, shifting continents like puzzle pieces across the seas, raising mountains where none had stood, pulling apart landmasses and closing ancient oceans. And with each movement came new climates, new challenges, and new opportunities for life to test its resilience. Vast forests thickened in the warmth of the Paleocene, green canopies stretching skyward to form worlds of shadow and light where creatures climbed, leapt, and hunted. Then came cooling spells, reshaping the vegetation, turning lush landscapes into open plains where speed, endurance, and sharper senses were suddenly the difference between life and death. Mammals, ever flexible, rose to each challenge, some developing hooves to outrun predators across widening grasslands, others growing larger jaws to chew the tougher plants that flourished in drier seasons, and still others shrinking, finding safety in remaining small, fast, and hidden. With time, predators grew in kind, creodonts with bone-crushing jaws, early carnivores testing forms that would one day refine into lions, wolves, and tigers, each new hunter sharpening the defenses of its prey, fueling a cycle of arms and armor that drove evolution forward like an endless contest. Yet, amidst this battle for survival, another quieter story was unfolding in the treetops, where small primates began to emerge, their fingers curling around branches, their eyes shifting forward to judge distance, their brains subtly expanding to process the complexity of life in 3 dimensions, where every leap, every grasp, could mean the difference between falling and flourishing. These primates were not yet apes, not yet human, but they carried the spark of something different, a seed planted in the soil of adaptability and chance. And though they were tiny players in a vast drama, their presence marked a shift that time itself seemed to favor. But Earth was not gentle. Periods of warmth gave way to ice. Coastlines rose and fell. Entire species thrived for millions of years only to vanish in the next upheaval. And yet through it all, the mammals diversified further, filling oceans as whales and dolphins, taking to the skies as bats, dominating plains as horses and bison, and stalking forests as tigers and bears. Each environment, each climate, acted as a sculptor, chiseling away weaknesses, rewarding flexibility, and punishing fragility, until life became an ever-branching tree of forms, some ephemeral, some enduring, all carrying echoes of the catastrophe that had once reset the earth. And while giants like mammoths and saber-toothed cats would one day rise and fall in their turn, the slow, steady ascent of primates in the shifting forests of Africa and Asia hinted at something profound, a new trajectory hidden beneath the chaos, one that would eventually question the very origins of the planet itself. Yet for now, the story is still one of landscapes in flux, of a world remade by tectonic drift and climate swings, and of mammals learning again and again that survival does not belong to those who resist change, but to those who embrace it, transforming with every challenge, carrying forward the fragile momentum that began in the ashes of the dinosaurs. In the deep forests of ancient Africa, where vines twisted like serpents and the canopy filtered sunlight into scattered beams, small primates moved with agility, their bodies perfectly balanced between fragility and adaptability, grasping branches with dexterous fingers that had slowly evolved from simple paws, forward-facing eyes sharpening with each generation to judge distance. Every leap through the tangled treetops, a gamble that refined both brain and body. And though they were just one thread in a vast ecological web, their story carried a hidden weight, for within them lay the blueprint of something extraordinary. Something the Earth itself seemed to be sculpting toward a new destiny. These early primates learned not just to survive, but to thrive in complexity, building memory maps of trees that bore fruit at certain times, sharpening communication calls to warn of predators, and developing social bonds that extended beyond instinct into cooperation, trust, and even rivalry. A rich tapestry of behaviors that required ever more sophisticated minds. And as forests thickened and then thinned again under shifting climates, primates adapted, some remaining small and nocturnal, others growing larger and diurnal, until among them appeared forms that resembled the ancestors of monkeys and apes, creatures that relied not merely on teeth or claws but on intelligence, curiosity, and flexibility. While predators evolved sharper fangs and prey evolved faster legs, these primates leaned into problem solving, and in doing so, they began to experiment with a kind of survival strategy no other species had dared: innovation. Branches became tools for defense, stones became weapons, and cooperative groups became powerful networks that multiplied their chances of enduring threats. Slowly, apes emerged, their bodies stronger, their social lives more intricate, and their reliance on intelligence more pronounced. Each step a rehearsal for a future that even they could not anticipate. In Asia and Africa, great apes roamed with power, their dominance etched in muscle and strategy, while in the quieter corners of their world, certain groups experimented with standing more upright, their spines and hips subtly adjusting, their hands freeing from locomotion to manipulation, a small anatomical shift that carried cosmic implications. Yet their world was unforgiving. Climate swings shattered forests, replaced them with open savannas, forcing apes to adapt or perish. And in this crucible of change, the seeds of humanity took root. For those who could stand upright could see, farther across the grasses, spot predators early, and free their hands for carrying, for shaping, for holding the first crude tools of survival. It was in these savannas that consciousness, still fragile, flickered like a spark in dry grass, fed by memory, sharpened by fear, nurtured by cooperation, until the beings who would one day call themselves human began their slow rise, unremarkable at first, but carrying within them the culmination of everything that had unfolded since the world burned with dinosaur bones. They were not inevitable. Their survival was balanced on the same knife edge as every other creature. But their story was different because they did not rely solely on claws, speed, or strength. They relied on adaptation of the mind, on the ability to reshape not just themselves, but the very world around them. And this shift would make them more dangerous, more resilient, and more transformative than any species before. But in this distant age, long before the word human had meaning, they were simply survivors. Small groups huddling together in shifting landscapes, unaware that they carried the future of art, war, language, and technology in their fragile, curious minds. The earth had passed from fire to forests, from reptiles to mammals, from apes to the ancestors of humanity. And though the journey was far from over, the trajectory was clear. From the ashes of the dinosaurs, the stage was set for the apes that would learn to question the stars.